still plenty of great fights to discuss. So without further ado, why don't we start off on First Look like we always do? And we're going to break down the first fight of the night. We're going to kick it off with the main event, but I'm going to just let you guys know off the rip. If you're new to the show, welcome aboard. I appreciate you being here, but my first look is not my most informed take of the week. I definitely come back with more thorough research done later on in the week when I have a more well-formed opinion. But what I wanted to do is early on in the week, after I've gotten to work, breaking down some trends, breaking down some of the early information, just giving you guys some early thoughts, and then getting after it in terms of my research over the course of the week and really shoring up my opinion. So without further ado, let's start off with just our initial impressions of Brendan Allen against Paul Craig. The first thing that just jumps out to me, I don't know what the prices are going to be for this, so let me just pop over and see if this has been released offshore yet. But the fight not to go the distance is something that's going to stand out to me immediately, and it's minus 800 in this fight, so no surprise there. We lost two, says Moyes. Parsons is out. Damn, I hate to hear that. If that's official news, the Slugger Knot is somebody that I really have cashed in on in the past as well. Plus 330 underdog on the Contender Series back in the day. But that's unfortunate to hear. So we could be down two matchups, but I haven't seen official word of that. I'm going to pop over to Twitter and see if there is official word that this matchup with Johnny Parsons has been canceled. However, I can confirm that I had heard independent rumors that he was going to be pulled off the card, unfortunately, as well. So let me see the latest on Johnny Parsons and see if there's anything that we could find. I'm not seeing anything officially reported yet, but that's an interesting note, Moyes. So hopefully we can get a update officially from the UFC as regards that matchup. But in any case, let's talk about the matchup at hand here. Why would I think that the first thing that stands out to me about Brendan Allen and Paul Craig being the fight not to go the distance? It's a number of things, but let's start with the obvious. Paul Craig, 13 out of 15 UFC fights end inside the distance. 22 out of 24 career professional bouts ended inside the distance for Paul, the BearJew Craig. On the Brendan Allen side of things, 10 out of 13 UFC fights have ended inside the distance, 21 out of 27 fights as a professional overall. So these are two guys that are proven finishers. You got Paul Craig, a little bit untested in this middleweight division. Obviously, last time out, he was able to get the win, an impressive win against Andre Muniz. And Andre Muniz, unfortunately, is a guy that's got a lot of skills on the floor, but he does not have the cardio to go at this UFC level for the hard 15-minute pace that it requires. And we've seen that against both of these guys, as a matter of fact. Common opponent between these two, and both of them are less credentialed in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, both obviously black belts, high level, but you see that the level gap was still there. It's just that Andre Muniz is unable to sustain that kind of pace and cardio. So when you start to force him to wrestle, grapple at a high pace, when you start to put damage on him, maybe it doesn't go so smoothly. And unfortunately, that's just been the case. We saw that with Paul Craig last time out. He's a big guy for this division at 185 pounds. He was a guy that was very successful with a limited skill set at 205 pounds. You got to remember, Paul Craig has maybe the best list of wins at light heavyweight, for a guy whose primary skill set is just pulling guard, having a really sophisticated guard attack, and a ground game that's lethal. You look back, he beats Jamal Hill, he beats Andre Muniz, he beats Nikita Krylov, he beats Kennedy and Nzechukwu, he beats Magomed Ankalaev, and he finishes each and every one of those guys. It's just really remarkable stuff that Paul Craig has been able to pull that off. But you also look at the other side of things, right? The Volkan Ozdemir loss, where he just looked all out of sorts, couldn't get the takedowns going, looked hopelessly out of place in the striking in that fight. And you saw that Volkan kind of just disrespected his ground game at times as well, posting on his hips, punching him in the face, kind of tiring him out a little bit. So I felt like we've seen improvements from Paul Craig over time in his approach, in how he trains for fights, in his fitness. If you ever watch a Paul Craig Instagram video, you're seeing this guy constantly putting in work in the gym. He's doing jumps. He's doing all this stuff. But he is a little bit of an elder statesman to be making this drop down in weight class, 35 years of age, going on 36 years of age. And I do think that could be a potential factor where it's hard to change weight classes later on in your career, takes a real lifestyle commitment. And I do think that we're seeing, that lifestyle commitment from Paul Craig, but it's still a lot to ask to take on one of these young, hungry up and comers like Brendan Allen, who's got this long win streak, 5 wins in a row, looking like he's done, a very good job of molding himself into a more complete UFC fighter. Let's look at Brendan Allen's run through the organization because it starts off um, back in the Contender Series 2019. He beats Aaron Jeffrey, a guy who's still relevant in other organizations, who's still, been putting together a pretty solid career for himself outside of the UFC. And you look at that win, it's aged okay. Kevin Holland, a guy who's went down to the welterweight division, obviously, but he was able to submit him there in the second round, kind of expose that ground game of Kevin Holland after some dicey moments early. If you guys remember, Kevin was able to take his back, put him in some danger. Brendan Allen showed some composure, showed some toughness, worked through the bad positions, and then was able to outgrapple his opponent in that spot. I thought that was an impressive win, to kind of break through in the UFC. And that's a tough debut. A lot of people would have lost in that spot, I feel like, and he was able to go out there and get the win. So great job. Shout out to John in the chat, says like and subscribe. I really appreciate you for saying that, brother. We got a bunch of people rocking with us live. I appreciate each and every one of you guys trying to get this in before Monday Night Football and some other distractions, and trying to get this out a little bit early on in the week so people have a chance to take in the information and do with it what they will. I always say, whether you're with me or against me, tail fade or indifferent, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the support, and thanks for rocking with us. But back to the career arc of Brendan Allen, he goes out there and he rattles off some wins. Tom Breeze, guy who was pretty unreliable in the UFC, but very talented overall, very skilled. And, he's had a couple close fights with good guys. So nothing to sneeze at that he got the win there via TKO in the first round. Got the Kyle Dawkins win, earned that one. Tough decision, tough fight there. But then you look at the Sean Strickland fight, right? And I believe that was a catch weight. Let me just pull this up. Catch weight at 195 pounds. So Brendan came in there, I believe, on short notice as well, taking on Sean Strickland, very closely lined fight. And Sean just beat the absolute tar out of him. If you guys go back and rewatch that, it was a classic Sean Strickland performance with a lot of pressure, kind of like that Abus Magomedov fight where he just keeps turning it up, getting in his face in exchanges, making him throw, making him miss. And then ultimately, I just think it was, big bank take little bank, a guy who had a lot of experience, who had been there in the fire a lot of times. And I think Brendan was a little overconfident in that spot and he got beat up, and it happens, right? He was a young man. You go back and look. Let's look at the specifics there. I believe Brendan Allen was just 24 years of age. Yeah, 24. He had not yet turned 25. So he was younger than I am now. And he was out there taking on Sean Strickland when he was 29 years of age, basically already had a lifetime in the UFC, did Sean Strickland. So that was a little bit of a wake-up call for him, right? He goes out there, he gets the win over Carl Roberson his next time out. But Carl Roberson's a guy that hasn't really borne out at the UFC level. Believe he's dealing with some stuff outside the octagon, so we wish him well there. And then I expected Punahele Soriano to beat up Brendan Allen at the time they were fighting. We've kind of seen Punahele Soriano struggle at this UFC level ever since. I kind of got off the train after seeing that fight. But what we saw in that performance was Brendan Allen just beat him up with body kicks, using his striking to dictate the exchanges. And I kind of thought that Brendan Allen was a guy that was always going to need to use his wrestling and his grappling. And I didn't see how he was going to implement that against Puna, who's kind of built like a house and had that really wide back. And I thought Puna could maybe put him in danger with his power, with the striking. But we saw in that spot, Puna really struggled. And Extreme Couture, took some notes from that and they were able to turn that around. I tweeted out earlier, Eric Nixick should be a call away for our guy, Paul Craig, if he's trying to beat Brendan Allen, because the two guys that have produced really good results against Brendan Allen in the UFC were Chris Curtis and Sean Strickland, both under the tutelage of Eric Nixick and the guys at Extreme Couture. And both of them were able to put on a boxing heavy pressure performance. And you saw that in the case of Chris Curtis, it was more with that counter boxing, with the power. And with Sean Strickland, it was more of that forward, get in your face, walk you down with pressure and power, or like half power, but basically overwhelm you with a barrage of shots and then turn on the power when the person starts to get overwhelmed. And you saw Brendan Allen's face, get really damaged up in that fight. He got hit pretty hard with some body shots in the fight against Chris Curtis. So we've definitely seen that there's been times he can get hit, he can get hurt, he can get damaged. But then you look at the recent win streak, the UFC kind of gave him that get right fight with Sam Alvey during Sam Alvey's retirement tour in the UFC. And then Jacob Malkoun, he was able to get the unanimous decision win there. But if you guys remember, that was a really close fight, played out within the margins. Let me go back and bring up the UFC stats for that fight. Because I remember it playing out close. Yeah, 7 takedowns for Jacob Malkoun. Mamba Malkoun out there putting on a takedown clinic. Brendan Allen, 2 takedowns in that fight, but he did outland him on significant strikes by 8, 44 to 33 on the totals there. So 45 to 33, excuse me. So he outlanded him by 12. But in any case, I just think of Brendan Allen as a guy that, he's a very dangerous fighter. And he's been putting together a much better win streak over time. The submission win over Jotko was good. Jotko, I believe, testing positive in the PFL. So shout out to him. I hope Jotko beats the case. And then Andre Muniz, he outlasted him there, beat him in a fight that I believe was moved up to the short notice main event. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, that ended up being the main event after a fight fell off night of. Span versus Krylov. Yeah, the fight fell off the night of, I believe. And so they moved that up to the main event. And unfortunately, Andre Muniz just did not have the cardio to go in that spot. And we had already mentioned that. So the 33-year-old there, Andre Muniz, the black belt, a guy that had a lot of skills on paper that could compete with Brendan Allen, he just wasn't able to keep up with his cardio and his conditioning. Bruno Silva in that last fight landed some good, clean shots. He's a guy that competed hard with Alex Pereira on the feet for 15 minutes. People always give him that credit when he's fighting, and he deserves it. But then you look at that fight with Brendan Allen, and frankly, he got beat up a little bit by Brendan Allen. Brendan Allen took some hard shots. It was definitely a close fight, and it was a back and forth war during that first round. I did think Brendan Allen looked a little wobbly at one point, but his ability to compose himself, to find his big shots on the feet, I thought he borderline knocked out Bruno Silva. But then what I really was impressed by was the finishing sequence from Brendan Allen there. Used really smart passing techniques while he had his opponent hurt. He was quick. He was efficient. He was coachable. I believe he was even looking over at his corner to get instructions on what they wanted him to do. And that back take is electric. The guy is really fast at sinking in his back take, at finishing when he gets control of the back as well. So I want to do more tape study before I bet on this fight. I certainly will not be laying the minus 450 price tag on Brendan Allen here, just because I have seen him rocked, wobbled, hurt in a number of fights. But I think he's on a positive career trajectory. I do think he's a guy that puts in a lot of hard work. I do think he's a guy that is young and experienced. He's put in a lot of that time. Looking at his record on paper, he's got 27 professional bouts compared to, I believe, 24 for Paul Craig. Let me just see if I'm doing the math that correct. So he does fit my criteria for a fighter who is younger with more professional experience, but unfortunately he's not an underdog. So it's not an auto click or anything like that. But Brendan Allen, let's just call it how it is. 10-2 in the UFC is a phenomenal record. He's put together a very good streak of wins in addition. So I think he's doing the right things. I think he's putting together a good win streak, but this is kind of where the rubber meets the road a little bit. Paul Craig obviously is all in at this point in his career. At 35 years of age, I don't know how many opportunities he's going to have left to main event, fight nights and get these big opportunities unless he can get the win here. So, this is a big spot for him. And I do think that it should be a hell of a scrap. I'm going to be looking for maybe an alternate under here. I just think that this fight's going to end violently almost always, because of the way that these two guys approach the game, and the conditioning factor is something that Brendan Allen typically likes to leverage against guys. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do that against Paul Craig, who's going to have to make those systemic lifestyle changes to make 185. But we often see that one of the consequences of cutting big amounts of weight can be cardio deficiencies. And it's one thing to outlast Andre Muniz, over the course of that fight, but it's a whole different ball game to outlast Brendan Allen, who I believe has 5-round experience in the LFA as well, as a former champion. I'd have to double check that, but I believe that that's true off the top of my head. So very interesting stuff. I think that this is an interesting point by Bailey in the comments section. And I want to shout out to the very sharp chat that we always have assembled here. I say it each and every week. Cheers. to the sharpest chat in the game. Bailey says ends by KO, gotta be a sprinkle. No, wonder what the odds will be. Yeah, it's all price dependent for me, but I do think that the ends by KO could be very interesting here. Two primary grapplers, just like with Sabatini and Lopes last week. That was a bet. The only bet I ended up winning last week. It wasn't a great week for me at the window, but Lopes and Sabatini ends by KO plus 345. You have two guys that are a combined 24-0 to the submission in that case, and yet everybody was expecting that it had to end by sub. One thing I always look for is a market inefficiency. When you've got two guys that are probably going to cancel out their best skills, maybe you can look for an alternative that the market's not considering. So definitely think that was a interesting spot. Now, shout out to some other people in the chat. I want to see if we've got any other questions or comments here. Victor says, what's up, Liam, in chat? Shout out to Victor. Real Deal Prime says wrestling rules. You know that. And we've got a lot of great fights still to break down. So without further ado, let's move to the next one. Shout out to Bailey for the kind comment as well. Liam, hardest working MMA knower. You're too kind, Bailey. Thank you. But there we go. We'll close the book there on the main event. And I'll just say my initial lean is that Brendan Allen, rightly favored, but very price prohibitive. Shout out to our guy Shady, who got in on Allen minus 275. It's all the way out to minus 450. So he's clearly done his job in terms of line movement. But for me, I've just seen a couple of sketchy moments from Allen that make me, a little bit worried. But I do think ends by KO could be very interesting.